It was a Wednesday in early November, and I was standing in the bread aisle of a Save on Foods I had never set foot in before, holding a loaf I didn't need because I needed something to hold. And then I saw her at the far end of the aisle. Her kerchief was tied the same careful way it had always been tied, her dress the same deep green she had worn for as long as I could remember, her hands resting on the handle of her cart, exactly the way they rested on everything, calm, sure, unbothered. My mother, 40 feet away from me in a grocery store on an ordinary Wednesday, my whole body simply stopped working. She looked up. For a second, she didn't move at all, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that maybe this time would be different, that maybe there'd be some small crack in it. A flicker, a half step toward me. There was a younger woman beside her cart, one of my cousins, Lavina, and Lavina's eyes flicked toward me and then toward my mother, waiting to see what would happen, the way you wait to see if a held breath is going to be let out. My mother looked directly at me. Her eyes held mine for what felt like a full second, maybe two, and then she looked back down at her cart, adjusted a bag of flour that didn't need adjusting, and turned toward the next aisle. Lavina followed her. I stood there holding a loaf of bread I had no intention of buying, and I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood there while the lights buzzed overhead, and I thought, so this is what they meant when they told us that leaving meant losing everyone who ever loved you. I had been gone from the colony for almost 4 months. My name is Hannah. I grew up on a Hutterite colony in rural Manitoba, and this is where I finally say out loud the things I was taught never to say at all. If you've ever had to choose between the people who raised you and the person you actually are, I think you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. What we called it on the colony was simply being put outside, and it isn't one moment. It's 1,000 small moments stacked on top of each other. It's a letter that comes back to you unopened, your own handwriting staring up at you from the envelope. It's a seat at the long dining hall table that quietly stops being set for you. It's not a locked door. It's an open door you can see clearly through, and you simply are no longer permitted to walk through it. I found out what that first one looked like in practice about 6 weeks after I left. I wrote to my younger sister Marlene, nothing heavy, just a page about the apartment Greta had helped me find, and a joke about how long it took me to figure out a parking meter. I tried calling first, actually, before I wrote anything. The colony phone was in the hall outside the kitchen, and I knew the hours when someone would likely be near it. A man's voice answered, one of the older men, not my father, and when I asked for Marlene by name, there was a long pause, long enough that I thought the line had dropped, and then he said only, "She isn't able to come to the phone," and hung up before I could say anything else. I stood in Greta's kitchen, holding the receiver after the line had already gone dead, the dial tone humming on, and I didn't put it down for a while. So I wrote instead. 3 weeks later, the letter came back. Same envelope, my own handwriting on the front, a strip of tape someone had used to reseal the flap where it had clearly been opened, read, and put back exactly where it came from before being mailed to me again, unanswered, like evidence. I sat on Greta's front step with it in my lap for a long time before I went inside. I didn't open it again. I still have it in a drawer, sealed. What being put outside actually costs day to day is something else entirely. It's a kind of social death administered slowly by people who know exactly which parts of you will ache the most. Not because they are cruel people, but because they believe fully that the pain of your absence will eventually outweigh whatever drove you away, that you'll miss your family enough to come back. What nobody accounts for is that some of us left because the table itself was where the wound came from. I was 23 when I left. I'd been baptized into the church at 18, which on the colony was unremarkable, even expected, and which also meant that leaving wasn't simply leaving anymore. It was breaking a vow made in front of everyone I'd ever known, standing in a white dress in a room where every face belonged to someone who had watched me grow up, where I said the words I was supposed to say because not saying them was never presented to me as a real option. The reasons I actually left are their own story. I'll tell you that one another time, when I'm ready, because it's not a small story, and it deserves its own space. What matters today is what those first months looked like. The first weeks, I stayed with a woman I'll call my anchor person, because that's truthfully what she was. Her name was Greta. She'd left her own colony in her late 20s, and when I showed up on her step with one bag and no idea what a debit card was, she didn't ask me a single question I wasn't ready for. She just took the bag out of my hand, set it by the door, and said, "You hungry, or do you just need to sit somewhere that isn't moving?" I said I didn't know. She said that was a completely normal answer and put the kettle on anyway. There's a particular kind of person who exists in the space between the colony world and the outside one. Greta found me through a woman 2 colonies over who'd left a decade before me and now ran something like an informal network. A phone number passed hand to hand among people who were thinking about leaving but didn't know what came after. I called that number from a payphone outside a gas station 4 days before I actually went, my hands shaking so badly I had to dial twice. Greta picked up on the second ring, like she'd been waiting for exactly this call her entire life, which, in a way, she had been. I didn't know how a lease worked, or what a credit score was, or why milk came in so many different versions. I want to be clear, I wasn't unintelligent. I'd run a household kitchen since I was 13, fed 40 people at harvest, kept 4 younger siblings clothed and quiet through church while my mother worked the garden. But the outside world isn't simply a different place. It's a different language. And I was starting from nothing. Greta took me to open my first bank account. And when the teller asked me to choose a PIN, I just stood there because nobody had ever asked me to choose a number that was only mine before. Greta laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Welcome to having things that belong only to you. It gets easier." I picked 4 numbers. I still use them. What I wasn't ready for was how much I'd grieve, not the leaving itself, but the shape of the life I'd left. Mornings that started before light. 50 people moving through a colony at once, stitched together by routines nobody questioned. I hadn't left a bad life. I'd left a life that fit me in every way, except the one that mattered most. Greta told me to give it a year. She said the fog clears eventually, that one day I'd be standing somewhere completely unremarkable and realize it had been gone for weeks without my noticing it leave. I held on to that sentence the way I used to hold on to a hymn, repeating it in stores that hummed too loud, in front of a television that moved faster than I could follow and assumed I already understood every reference it made. And then it was November, 4 months in, and I was standing in a bread aisle, and I saw my mother, and Lavina was beside her, and for 1 second I thought it might go differently. It didn't. Here's what I've never quite been able to explain to people who didn't grow up in a place like mine. My mother is not a cold woman. She used to rest her hand against my cheek every single morning before I left for the kitchen without saying anything, the way you breathe without thinking about it. She sat up with me for 3 nights straight when I had pneumonia at 10, telling me stories about her own girlhood in a voice barely above a whisper. She could walk into a hall of 60 people and within minutes know exactly who was carrying something heavy that day, and she would find her way to that person before the meal ended. She loved with a thoroughness I haven't found anywhere else since. And she walked past me in a grocery store as though I were made of air because she believes genuinely that her silence is an act of love, that the pain she causes me is a bridge leading back toward God on my behalf, that if she holds the line firmly enough, I'll eventually feel the distance is unbearable and come home. She isn't wrong that the distance is unbearable. She's wrong about what it makes me want to do about it. If this is landing with you so far, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and turn on the bell. I have a lot more of these to tell, including the story behind why I actually left, and I'm not going anywhere. I left the store without buying anything. I sat in the parking lot in the secondhand Toyota Greta had helped me buy, a faded blue Corolla that still smelled faintly like someone else's life, and I just sat there, watching the doors open and close while strangers carried in their ordinary Wednesday errands. I thought about the version of this exact moment I'd rehearsed in my head before I ever left, the way you rehearse a surgery you know is coming. I'd told myself it would hurt in ways I couldn't fully anticipate, but that I'd survive it. I still believe that. What I hadn't rehearsed was the specific pain of being looked through by someone who has known every version of me that has ever existed. My mother held me within hours of my birth. She knows the exact sound I make when I'm trying not to cry. She knows I'm afraid of open water and that I can't sleep if there's a sound in the house I can't place. She knows that I used to sing quietly to myself while I worked as a girl, and that I stopped at 14 because somebody told me it drew too much attention to myself. A stranger's gaze carries nothing in it. What she gave me in that aisle was a look completely full, full of recognition, full of the whole weight of who I am to her, and then, carefully, deliberately, emptied. 1 second to fill, 1 second to drain. Then she turned her cart toward the next aisle, and Lavina followed, and neither of them looked back. I drove back to Greta's and sat at her kitchen table while she made tea without asking if I wanted any. I told her everything. The aisle, the cart, the 1 full second. Lavina's eyes flicking back and forth like she was watching to see whether the rules would bend. Greta listened the way she always listened, completely without rushing me anywhere. When I finished, she didn't say anything wise right away. She just refilled my cup, sat back down across from me, picked at the edge of the table the way she did when she was thinking. And after a while, she asked, "Did she look well?" I actually laughed because it was such an unexpected question and somehow exactly the right one. I thought about it honestly. The kerchief tied just so, the steady hands on the cart, the way she'd moved through the aisles like she belonged completely to that world. She looked well, I said. She looked like herself. And there was real grief in that. But underneath the grief, there was something else too. Something almost not quite, but almost like relief. Because she was intact. Because the world I'd left hadn't fallen apart without me in it. Because the woman who used to rest her palm against my cheek every morning was still moving through her days with the same calm hands. Greta didn't try to talk me out of the grief or rush me toward the relief either. She just said, both of those can sit at the table at the same time. You don't have to pick which one gets to stay. I didn't understand what she meant that night. I think I do now. I was the one who had changed. I was the one sitting in a parking lot that felt too wide beside a Corolla that smelled like somebody else's old life, trying to find where I fit inside a world that hadn't shaped itself around me yet. But I was also, for the first time, the one who had chosen something. That's the part nobody warns you about when you leave a place where every decision has been made for you since the day you were born. What you'll wear, who you'll marry, what your days will look like from sunrise until the last hymn at night. The leaving is devastating. Being put outside is devastating. The bread aisle, the emptied eyes, the turned cart, all of it is genuinely devastating. And underneath all of that, quietly, like something growing where you can't quite see it yet, you made a choice. Nobody could take that away from me. Being put outside could take my mother's gaze, my sister's voices on a phone line, the letter that came back sealed in tape. It couldn't take the fact that for the first time in my life, I had decided something for myself, by myself. I'm not telling you the grief was worth it. I don't think grief works like a ledger you balance that way. I'm telling you both things were true at once. It's been almost 2 years now since that November afternoon. I've gone back to that same Save on Foods more times than I can count. I haven't seen my mother there again, though I still half look for her every time I turn into the bread aisle, some small automatic part of me still checking. I haven't spoken to her. She hasn't spoken to me. The letter is still in the drawer, sealed. Some nights I take it out and just hold it, the way I held that loaf of bread. Not because I need what's inside it, but because I need something solid to hold while I sit with all of this. If this is the kind of story that means something to you, please subscribe and like the video, Aku, and stay close. Because the next one is the story I mentioned earlier, the actual reason I left the colony in the first place, and it's not a small one. What I know now is this: the colony gave me a mother who loved me with everything she had. It also gave her a precise set of instructions for what to do with that love the moment I stopped fitting the shape it required. And she followed those instructions with the same steadiness she's brought to everything else in her life. I can't bring myself to hate her for that. I've tried on the harder nights to locate something that feels like hatred, and I simply cannot reach it. What I find instead, every time, is just the hand on my cheek, and the silence in the aisle sitting side by side, neither one canceling the other out. What I have instead of hatred is a Corolla that doesn't smell like anyone else's life anymore. My own hands on my own steering wheel, choosing my own 4-digit number, my own everything, one small decision at a time, and jeans that 4 months in had still felt borrowed, like a costume I hadn't quite earned the right to wear, and that now finally just feel like mine. This was Hannah, and this is my life. Said out loud. Because staying quiet was never really safety. It was just a smaller, quieter kind of cage.